At my cousin's wedding reception, I asked my brother if he had forwarded the lease renewal notice from my landlord. He said he never received anything, but I already knew he had. I just needed to hear him say it out loud. My name is Cole Merritt. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that blood meant something. I believed that if you handed someone your trust, especially someone who grew up in the same house as you, they would handle it carefully. I was wrong. And the way I found out changed everything about how I see family, loyalty, and the quiet, careful way I fight back. Let me take you back about 8 months before that wedding. I had been living in Portland for 3 years, working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction firm. I liked my apartment. It was a second-floor unit on a quiet street, good natural light, close enough to walk to work when the weather allowed. My landlord, a retired teacher named Mr. Garfield, ran a tight ship. Rent on time, no complaints, and he appreciated tenants who communicated. We had a good thing going. The problem was that I had been traveling for work almost constantly that spring. A big commercial build outside of Boise had me on site Monday through Friday for nearly 2 months straight. I was living out of a hotel, managing subcontractors, barely sleeping. I had set up mail forwarding, but it was slow and unreliable. Important things were slipping through the cracks. My brother Derek lived about 20 minutes from my apartment. He was 35, between jobs at the time, and had been staying at our parents' house to save money. He had a car, free time, and I trusted him completely. So when Mr. Garfield mentioned he might be sending an updated lease and a renewal form for the next year, I asked Derek if he could swing by my mailbox once a week, collect anything that looked important, and either scan it or hold it for me. Derek said of course. He had a spare key I had given him 2 years earlier for emergencies. He knew my building. He said it was no problem at all. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. Derek would text me occasionally saying nothing important had arrived. I was relieved. I was drowning in work and just needed that one piece of my life handled. Then, in early April, Mr. Garfield emailed me directly. He said he had sent the renewal paperwork 3 weeks earlier and hadn't heard back. He needed a response within 10 days, or he would assume I was vacating and begin showing the unit. He was polite about it, but the message was clear. I had a deadline, and I was dangerously close to losing my apartment. I called Derek immediately. He picked up on the second ring and told me, casually, that nothing important had come. Maybe the letter got lost. Maybe I should call the landlord and ask him to resend it. Something in his voice was off. Not nervous exactly. More like practiced. Like he had already thought through what he would say if I asked. I didn't push it. Not yet. I thanked him, hung up, and sat with that feeling for a while. I emailed Mr. Garfield back and explained the situation. I told him I was out of town for work and that there may have been a mail collection issue on my end. I asked if he could email me a copy of the lease renewal. He was understanding and sent it within an hour. I signed it digitally, returned it the same day, and the apartment was secured. But I could not stop thinking about that phone call. Derek had a habit I noticed over the years of minimizing inconvenient truths, not lying exactly, or at least not in obvious ways. He would just quietly let things disappear. A favor he said he would do and didn't. A message he said he would pass along that never arrived. Small things. The kind of things you forgive because they never seem to cost you much. Until they did. I started thinking about why he would withhold a lease renewal letter. It didn't make sense on the surface. What could he possibly gain from me losing my apartment? Then I remembered a conversation from about 6 weeks earlier. Derek had mentioned, almost offhandedly, that he was tired of living at our parents' house. He wanted his own space, but couldn't afford Portland prices. He had floated the idea, half joking, that maybe I should move somewhere cheaper, and he could take my unit since Mr. Garfield gave good rates to reliable tenants. I had laughed it off. I assumed he was venting. I no longer assumed that. Here's what I think happened. I think Derek collected my mail. I think he saw the lease renewal. And I think he made a choice, quietly and deliberately, to not tell me about it, hoping that if I missed the deadline, my apartment would become available and he could step in. He wasn't going to steal from me directly. He was just going to let me fail, and then position himself to benefit. That is a specific kind of betrayal. It doesn't leave fingerprints. It just looks like bad luck on your end. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I did not confront Derek immediately. I did not send an angry text. I did not call my parents and turn it into a family emergency. I have learned over the years that the loudest response is rarely the most effective one. When someone is willing to be dishonest quietly, they are usually also willing to deny it loudly. You cannot out-argue a person who has already decided to lie. What you can do is find out the truth on your own terms and then decide what to do with it. So I built a test. I called my landlord and explained that I had a family situation and needed to update the contact process for any future correspondence. Mr. Garfield, who was nothing but accommodating, agreed to help. We set up a simple arrangement. If he ever needed to reach me about anything related to the unit, he would send 2 versions, the real one directly to my email, and a secondary letter to my mailbox, which Derek was still technically collecting since I hadn't told him to stop. The secondary letter would contain slightly different details. Not fake, but altered just enough that I would know which version Derek had seen if he ever mentioned it. The renewal date in the mailbox version was listed as the 1st of the month. The real one said the 15th. Small difference. Enough. Then I waited. I want to describe what that waiting felt like because I think it matters. It was not angry waiting. It was not anxious waiting. It was the kind of quiet, focused patience you develop when you realize that truth has its own gravity. It moves toward the surface eventually. All you have to do is not interfere. 2 weeks passed. Derek texted me once to say he had swung by and grabbed the mail. He said there was nothing important. He said it casually. He didn't mention the landlord letter at all, which I knew from Mr. Garfield had arrived 3 days earlier. A week after that, Derek called me. He said he had been thinking, and he wanted to talk to me about something. He said he had heard through our mom that my lease was coming up, and he was wondering if I had thought about what I was going to do. He mentioned, again, that he was really struggling at our parents' place. He said if I ever decided to move on, he would love to be considered for my unit since he and Mr. Garfield had actually spoken once when Derek dropped off a package. Then he said something that stopped me cold. He said he thought my renewal was coming up on the 1st of the month. He wanted to know if I'd signed anything yet. The 1st of the month. That was the date on the letter in my mailbox. The one I had told Mr. Garfield to alter slightly. The real date was the 15th. Derek didn't know that. He thought he had the real information. He thought he was working with accurate intelligence. He thought I didn't know what he had. I stayed calm. I told him the lease was handled, and I planned to stay for another year. He paused for a second, then said that was great. He was happy for me. He sounded exactly like someone who had just watched a plan quietly collapse. I said, just before I ended the call, that I appreciated him checking the mail all those weeks. I told him I noticed he was really on top of it. Another pause. He said, yeah, of course, anything for family. I said, right, anything for family. I let the silence sit there for a moment. Then I said goodbye and hung up. That was the moment I knew for certain. Not because he confessed. He would never confess. But because of the date. Because of the careful, practiced way he had worked himself toward a position where he could benefit from my misfortune. Because of the word family sitting in his mouth like something he had borrowed without permission. Now I want to talk about what I did with that knowledge. Because this is the part I think matters most. I did not explode. I did not send a long message laying out everything I knew. I did not tell my parents. I did not poison the well at family gatherings or make things awkward at Thanksgiving. I made a different choice. I changed the locks on my apartment and did not give Derek a new key. I told him when he asked that my landlord had done a building-wide rekey and I only had 1 copy. He accepted that without pushing back, which told me everything I needed to know about whether he understood why it had really happened. I updated all my mail handling so nothing important would ever pass through his hands again. I quietly moved my banking correspondence, my insurance documents, and anything else that mattered to a P.O. box I opened under my own name. I kept showing up to family dinners. I kept being warm and present. I kept the relationship on the surface exactly where Derek expected it to be, because that surface was now the only access he had. The deeper thing, the real trust, the kind that opens doors literally and figuratively, that was gone. Not loudly, not with a ceremony, just quietly rerouted to people who had earned it. Now here's the part where I want to speak directly. Some of you watching this have been in a version of this situation. Maybe not an apartment. Maybe it was a job reference that quietly disappeared, a business opportunity that somehow ended up benefiting someone else in your circle, a loan you gave that got forgotten, a recommendation that never got passed along. The form of the betrayal changes. The shape of it is always the same. Someone close enough to help you decided instead to let you fail, or actively made sure that you would, because your loss created something they wanted. And the worst part is not the act itself. The worst part is that if you had asked them directly, they would have looked you in the eye and said they had no idea what you were talking about. They would have blamed the postal service. They would have blamed timing. They would have said they were going to tell you. They just hadn't gotten around to it yet. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from dealing with that kind of person, because you cannot win the argument. You cannot make them admit what they did. The evidence you have is real, but it lives in a register they will never acknowledge. The gap between what you know and what they will ever say out loud becomes a wall you keep running into. So you stop running into it. You get quiet. You get careful. You stop offering the kind of access that can be misused. Not because you stop loving them. Some of these people you will love your whole life, but love and access are not the same thing. And once someone has shown you how they handle your access, you're allowed to adjust it. You're allowed to do that without a speech, without an ultimatum, without turning it into a confrontation that they will spin into you being the difficult one. Before I tell you how the story ends, let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life who was only helpful when they could also benefit? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. About 6 months after the wedding reception, Derek told me he had finally found his own place, a 1-bedroom in a neighborhood on the east side of the city. He seemed genuinely happy about it. I told him I was glad. I meant it. We were at a family dinner when he said it. My mom was at the table, my dad, my aunt, who visits from Phoenix every fall. Normal Sunday dinner, the kind that smells like pot roast and sounds like 4 conversations happening at once. Derek was talking about his new apartment, describing the neighborhood, saying it had good light and a nice kitchen. My mom asked him how he had finally managed to afford it. He said he had been saving for months and had gotten a small bonus from a new job he had started. My dad looked at me and said, "See, things work out." I smiled and said they do. And they had, just not the way Derek had originally planned. He had wanted my apartment. He had made a quiet move to get it, a move that required me to lose something I had worked for, and it had not worked because I had been paying attention. He had found his own place instead, and whether he knew I knew or not, the outcome was the same. He was building his own life now, from his own resources, without benefiting from my loss. I want to be honest about something. There's a version of this story where I feel triumphant, where I replay that moment on the phone when Derek said the wrong date, and I feel like I won something, and I won't pretend that moment wasn't satisfying. There was something deeply clarifying about having the proof I needed, about knowing that my instinct had been right. But what I actually felt, sitting at that dinner table watching my brother talk about his new apartment, was something quieter than triumph. It was closer to relief. Relief that I had not ignored the feeling in my gut. Relief that I had not let the comfort of assuming the best about family override the evidence in front of me. Relief that I had protected myself without burning everything down. Because here is what I have come to understand. The goal was never to punish Derek. The goal was to stop being vulnerable to him. Those are 2 very different things, and chasing the wrong one will cost you years of your life. Punishment requires his participation. It requires him to acknowledge what he did, to feel the weight of it, to change. And that is entirely outside your control. You cannot make someone feel the weight of something they have decided to carry lightly. You will exhaust yourself trying. Protection only requires you. It requires you to see clearly, to adjust quietly, and to keep building your life in a way that roots around the people who have shown you they will use your trust against you. That is what I did. And my apartment still has good natural light. My locks have not been touched since I changed them. My mail goes to a box with my name on it. And at that Sunday dinner, I passed my brother the rolls when he reached for them, and we talked about his new neighborhood like 2 people who had arrived at a kind of peace, even if only one of us knew exactly what that peace had cost. I never told him what I knew. I never sent the message I drafted and deleted 4 times. I never gave him the confrontation that would have let him rewrite the story into one where he was the victim of my suspicion. I just moved quietly. I moved forward. I kept what was mine. If you are in something like this right now, I want to say this clearly. You do not need their confession to protect yourself. You do not need them to admit what they did before you are allowed to respond to what they did. The truth does not require their signature. You are allowed to change the locks. You're allowed to open your own P.O. box. You're allowed to reroute the things that matter through channels that are actually safe. You're allowed to keep showing up to family dinner and still decide, quietly and without apology, that some doors are now permanently closed. You're allowed to protect your home, your time, your documents, your access, and your peace. You're allowed to do all of that without making it a scene. And you're allowed to pass someone the rolls at Sunday dinner and mean it, even after everything, because forgiveness and access are also not the same thing. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.